We moved into the neighborhood at the start of spring, excited for a fresh start. After years of long days in courtrooms and the chaos of downtown living, my wife and I, both practicing attorneys, wanted something quieter for our twin boys. A peaceful suburb with wide streets, clean yards, and friendly neighbors seemed like the perfect fit. For a few weeks, everything was exactly what we hoped for. The boys made friends quickly. The house had a lovely porch for evening dinners, and we finally had space to breathe. That peace lasted until Karen showed up, clipboard in hand, perfectly ironed shirt, and that expression like she was smelling something sour. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA. What should have been a friendly hello turned into an unexpected inspection. She immediately pointed out that our garbage bins were visible from the curb, that our lawn chairs weren't the approved shade of beige, and that our grass looked a little aggressive. We smiled politely and thanked her, thinking she was just over-enthusiastic, but Karen didn't stop. She kept coming by, once about the basketball hoop, once because our sunflowers were disrupting uniformity, and another time because the kids chalked hopscotch on the sidewalk. It was as if she made it her personal mission to enforce a private set of rules no one else seemed to know about. Still, we kept things civil. Every time she knocked, we listened, asked for the exact rule, and told her we'd review it, though she never actually showed us anything official. It was always under Section X, Paragraph Y, with no follow-up. We let it go, thinking she'd get tired and move on. But everything changed the day we hosted a barbecue. It was a warm Saturday afternoon. We invited some friends, mostly family. Brother Josh, a property attorney, was in town, and a few other law school friends brought their kids. We set up a grill on the driveway, laid out chairs, turned on light music, and let the kids run around with water balloons. It was nothing wild, just a suburban summer gathering. Karen didn't see it that way. She marched up uninvited, demanding. We shut it down immediately because we were violating noise restrictions and creating an unauthorized public event. We told her firmly we were on our own property, and nothing in the HOA handbook, as far as we'd seen, prohibited this. She muttered something about calling authorities and stormed off. We laughed it off, thinking she was bluffing. But 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to our house. That's when we realized Karen wasn't just annoying, she was serious. What she didn't know, though, was that every adult in that yard was a licensed attorney, and we were more than ready to meet her legal fire with fire of our own. The police officers stepped out of their cruisers slowly, scanning the scene as if they expected some kind of riot, but all they saw was a backyard barbecue, kids laughing, adults chatting, and ribs smoking on the grill. One of the officers approached with a polite but confused look on his face. Afternoon, we got a call about a disturbance, possibly a violation of HOA ordinances. My wife and I exchanged a glance. Of course it was Karen. I stepped forward and introduced myself, explaining that this was a private family event, fully on our property, and that there was no law being broken. The officer nodded slowly and said, "Honestly, we figured." But the caller was insistent and made it sound more serious than it was. My brother Josh, who specializes in property and municipal law, came over with a plate of grilled chicken in one hand and calmly said, "Just out of curiosity, what statute or ordinance would apply here?" The officer admitted there wasn't one. Karen had simply exaggerated, claiming we were holding a disruptive gathering that violated local noise laws, which didn't even go into effect until 10 p.m., and it wasn't even 5. My wife, a former prosecutor, pulled up a copy of the city's public nuisance codes on her phone and showed it to the officers. They smiled, apologized, and told us to enjoy our evening. Karen stood across the street watching the whole thing unfold, her arms crossed and face tight with frustration. As the officers left, one waved to her with a slight shake of his head. They knew they'd been played. That moment made something snap in me. Karen hadn't just tried to enforce her interpretation of HOA rules. She had weaponized public resources to harass us. That went beyond annoying. That was abuse of authority. If she wanted to turn this into a legal game, she'd just made her first serious mistake. The next morning, I gathered my wife and Josh at the kitchen table. We pulled out the HOA handbook and began combing through every section. We flagged vague language, found inconsistencies, and highlighted every part that gave board members power or limited it. Then we pulled the meeting minutes from the last 2 years, which had to be made public under state HOA transparency laws. What we found was a mess. Karen had been operating as if she were a one-woman government, issuing fines that weren't approved by the board, selectively enforcing rules on people she didn't like, and refusing to document complaints properly. She had no legal basis for most of her so-called violations. Even worse, there were records of budget approvals with no receipts, suggesting she was using HOA funds for things like landscaping that only benefited her own property. That was more than overreach. That was mismanagement, maybe even fraud. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one from a family who knew exactly how to take her down. By the book, the following week, we got to work. What started as a quiet effort to defend ourselves quickly turned into a full-scale legal deep dive into Karen's reign as HOA president. My wife drafted a formal request for financial disclosures, which according to state law Karen was obligated to provide within 10 business days. We weren't surprised when she ignored it. So, we sent a certified letter, CC'd the entire HOA board, and quoted the exact legal statutes she was violating by withholding records. That got her attention. 3 days later, she emailed a PDF of documents that looked like they had been slapped together in a panic. The numbers didn't add up. Several landscaping payments were made to a company that didn't exist in the state business registry. A community improvement fund had nearly $8,000 withdrawn over the past year for beautification, but only Karen's yard had new planters, pavers, and a security camera system. It was classic self-dealing. We compiled everything into a neat folder marked and tabbed and organized a special HOA meeting, calling on the board and residents to attend. Karen tried to delay the meeting, claiming procedural issues, but she was overruled when we presented a petition signed by more than a third of the homeowners. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Some people came out of curiosity, others out of frustration. Karen sat at the head of the table like she owned the place, still carrying that clipboard like a badge of honor. I calmly stood up, thanked everyone for coming, then opened the folder and began presenting our findings. I showed proof of unapproved spending, abuse of power, and selective enforcement of made-up rules. My wife spoke next, reading testimonies from neighbors who'd been harassed just like us. Then Josh explained in plain language how Karen's actions could potentially expose the HOA to civil liability. The room grew tense. People looked at each other, whispering, shaking their heads. Karen, visibly rattled, tried to interrupt, saying we were twisting facts. That's when my wife calmly read from the HOA charter, the part that said any board member can be removed by a simple majority vote at a special meeting. A neighbor in the back raised her hand and said, then I motioned to vote Karen out. As president, another followed with, I second. In under 5 minutes, we had the votes. Karen's face turned pale as the room turned on her, not out of anger, but out of sheer exhaustion. People were tired of the drama, the pettiness, and the abuse. She stood up, sputtered something about suing us all, and walked out without another word. For the first time since moving in, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to everyone again. That night, after the meeting, neighbors stayed behind just to talk. They asked legal questions, thanked us, and laughed for the first time in weeks. And we knew we weren't done yet. Karen had been removed, but it was time to make sure no one like her ever held that kind of power again. Just when we thought it was over, Karen made one last attempt to regain control. A week after she was voted out, we received a cease and desist letter in the mail written on a cheap legal template she probably downloaded online accusing us of defamation, harassment, and unlawful interference with HOA operations. My wife and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. We'd spent our entire careers writing and responding to legal threats far more serious than this. But instead of dismissing it, we decided to respond the way professionals do, calmly, thoroughly, and with absolutely no wiggle room. Josh, ever the meticulous one, drafted a 12-page response that not only debunked every claim in her letter, with factual evidence, but also laid out a very real legal case against her. We included the financial mismanagement, the abuse of authority, and statements from other homeowners. We made it crystal clear. If she chose to escalate, we would file a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board and pursue civil damages. We gave her 5 business days to retract her claims. She never responded. Instead, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn less than 2 weeks later. Karen never said a word to us again. One morning, a moving truck showed up, and by that evening, she was gone quietly, without drama, like a chapter the whole neighborhood was ready to close. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. A new board was formed, with balanced, firm residents who actually cared about community, not control. They invited us to help rewrite portions of the HOA charter, to clarify vague language and ensure future board members couldn't wield unchecked power. We accepted. Over the next few months, the neighborhood came alive. Families started hosting porch dinners again. Kids played in driveways without fear of being written up, and neighbors who'd once avoided each other began reconnecting. The absurd chair color rules were thrown out. Fines were reevaluated, and a shared garden was started in the community park, ironically, in the same spot Karen once tried to have people fined for loitering. Looking back, it's almost surreal how far things went over something so simple as a barbecue. But that's how power works when left unchecked. Even the smallest positions can become dangerous. Karen underestimated us because we were new, because we were kind, and because she thought she could intimidate us into silence. What she didn't realize was that we were lawyers, not just by training, but by instinct. We didn't need to raise our voices or break the rules to beat her. All we needed was the truth, the law, and a community that had finally had enough. We didn't just win the fight, we helped change the neighborhood for good. And every time, we sat on our porch after that, watching the boys shoot hoops or waving to neighbors as they passed by. We were reminded that justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes, it starts in your own driveway. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Resist Voices for more powerful stories that challenge authority and speak truth.